$450,000 a year. 80 out of every 100 people who start flight training never finish it, and almost none of them quit because they cannot fly. They quit because the money runs out first. That is what a senior wide-body captain earns flying international routes, and the ladder up to him takes 15 years and starts with you paying $100,000 to earn nothing. Most people think becoming an airline pilot is about skill. Skill gets you hired. After that, skill becomes almost irrelevant to your pay. Airlines run on seniority, which is a single list of every pilot at that carrier ordered by hire date. Your position on that list decides your aircraft, your schedule, your days off, your vacation, and your salary. A brilliant pilot hired in March earns less than an average pilot hired in February, permanently, at the same company. And the list does not transfer. Change airlines and you start at the bottom again, no matter how many hours you have. That single rule explains every decision pilots make. Let's start at the bottom. The student pilot earns nothing and spends between $90,000 and $120,000. This is the only rung with negative pay. You start in a small single-engine trainer and work through the private license, then the instrument rating, then commercial, then multi-engine. Every hour in the airplane costs you between $180 and $300, depending on aircraft and region. You fly patterns until landings become automatic. You fly under a hood with no outside reference, controlling the airplane on instruments alone, and the first few hours of that make most people slightly sick. Getting in requires a medical certificate and money, and the medical eliminates people quietly at the very start for vision, cardiac, and neurological findings. Attrition here is brutal. Somewhere near 80% of people who begin flight training never finish. Almost none of them quit because they cannot fly. They quit because the money runs out. The thing nobody tells you is that the cost is not the listed price. Nearly everyone takes longer than the minimum hours, and the gap between the advertised program cost and the real cost is routinely $25,000. There is a detail about the medical that ends careers before they start, and almost nobody checks it first. The first-class medical certificate is required to fly for an airline, and it screens for conditions that are common in the general population. Certain cardiac findings, insulin-dependent diabetes, some psychiatric histories, and specific medications are disqualifying outright or require a special issuance that takes months and may be denied. People routinely spend $40,000 on training before discovering they cannot hold the certificate. The entire risk is removable for a few $100s. Get the first-class medical before your first lesson, not after, and know the answer before you spend anything. The flight instructor earns $25 to $45 an hour, but only for hours actually flown, which works out to roughly $38,000 to $62,000 a year. You are now teaching other people to fly while building your own hours toward the airlines. You sit in the right seat of the same small trainer, 8 hours a day, watching a student make the same mistakes you made, and you learn to keep your hands near the controls without touching them. You fly in whatever weather is legal because your income depends on flight hours, not calendar days. Getting here means earning the instructor certificate, another $5,000 to $8,000 on top of everything already spent. Very few wash out at this stage because the hard filtering already happened. What happens instead is grinding. You need 1,500 hours to fly for an airline, and instructing accumulates them at roughly 700 hours a year. That is 2 years minimum. The thing nobody tells you is that instructing is where pilots actually learn to fly. Explaining a maneuver 40 times to people who do it wrong in 40 different ways builds a depth of understanding that flying alone never produces. Instructing also teaches you the thing that separates safe pilots from lucky ones, which is recognizing your own limits in advance rather than discovering them. You cancel a lesson because the crosswind exceeds what your student can handle, and then one day, you cancel because it exceeds what you can handle. And saying that out loud gets easier with practice. Aviation calls this aeronautical decision-making and teaches it formally, but the actual learning happens in a small trainer on a marginal day when nobody would have known if you had gone anyway. The regional first officer earns $90 to $110 per flight hour, roughly $90,000 to $110,000 a year, with typical guarantees and bonuses. Signing bonuses at regionals have pushed first-year totals higher in recent years. You are now in a jet, flying 70 to 76 passengers, in the right seat next to a captain. You do not command the aircraft. You fly alternating legs, run checklists, work the radios, and handle the paperwork. You commute to your base, often flying standby on your own days off just to get to work. Your schedule is whatever is left after everyone's senior picked theirs, which means holidays, red-eyes, and 4-day trips. Getting here requires 1,500 hours and an airline transport pilot certificate, or 1,250 with a restricted certificate from an approved university program. Washout in airline training is low, under 10%, but it exists and it is abrupt. Failing a check ride in initial training can end the job. The thing nobody tells you is that regional pay looks far better in year 1 than year 4. The signing bonus inflates the first year, and the pay scale afterward flattens hard. It is worth explaining what the 1,500-hour rule actually did, because it defines this entire ladder. Before it existed, a pilot with 250 hours could be hired directly into an airline right seat. On the 12th of February 2009, a regional aircraft on approach to Buffalo stalled and came down on a house in Clarence Center, New York. 50 people died, 49 on board and 1 on the ground. The captain had failed multiple check rides. The first officer had commuted overnight from Seattle and had been paid roughly $16,000 that year. Congress responded by writing the 1,500-hour rule, and every pilot who has trained since pays for that night in 2 extra years of instructing. It created the flight instructor bottleneck. It created the pay gap in the middle of the ladder, and it is the single largest reason the path takes as long as it does. Whether it made flying safer is genuinely debated inside the industry, because hours spent teaching patterns in a small trainer are not obviously preparation for jet operations. What is not debated is that it reshaped the career. The regional captain earns $135,000 to $170,000 a year, more with premium and overtime flying. You move to the left seat and you are now legally in command. You make the decisions about weather, fuel, diversions, and whether the airplane goes. You sign for the aircraft. When a passenger situation escalates or a system fails, it is your call and yours alone, and the first officer beside you might have 400 hours of jet time. Getting here takes 2 to 5 years at a regional, depending on how fast that airline is growing, because upgrade is purely a function of seniority and attrition above you. There is no washout rate, only a waiting time, and that waiting time swings wildly with hiring cycles. The thing nobody tells you is that most regional captains do not want to stay regional captains. They are building the 1,000 hours of turbine command time that makes a major airline application competitive. The left seat at a regional is a stepping stone that happens to pay well. There is a rung between the regional and the major that a lot of pilots take without planning to. Cargo feeder operations, corporate flight departments flying light jets, and specialized work like aerial survey, pipeline patrol, and air ambulance all sit in this band. Pay runs $90,000 to $160,000. These jobs exist because they need experienced pilots and cannot compete with airline schedules, so they compete on other things. Home every night, no commuting, small teams. Some pilots take 1, intending to stay 2 years and stay 20. The trade is the ceiling. You will not reach $400,000 in these roles, and the pension and contract protections of an airline do not exist. But a pilot flying air ambulance in their home city is home for dinner most nights of their career, and the number of airline captains who describe that as the thing they gave up is not small. The major airline first officer earns $180,000 to $260,000 a year, depending on aircraft and years of service. Yes, the co-pilot at a major usually out-earns the captain at a regional by a wide margin. You are flying larger aircraft with more passengers on longer routes, and your quality of life improves immediately because major airline contracts include better rest rules, better hotels, and more days off. But you are back at the bottom of a seniority list, which means junior schedules again, reserve status where you sit at home on call, and the worst vacation picks. Getting here means being competitive in a hiring pool that values turbine command time, a clean record, and often a 4-year degree even though it is not legally required. The thing nobody tells you is that the transition costs money in the short term. Pilots routinely take a pay cut in the first year at a major because of reserve guarantees and losing their regional seniority, and it takes 2 to 3 years before the move clearly pays off. Something about the schedule that outsiders consistently misunderstand. Airline pilots do not work a fixed number of days. You bid for a monthly schedule built from trips, and your seniority decides whether you get what you asked for. A senior pilot might fly 4 trips of 3 days each and be home for 18 days. A junior pilot at the same airline flying the same aircraft might be on reserve, which means sitting at home in uniform readiness with a phone, unable to leave a defined radius, for 15 days, and possibly flying almost none of them. Reserve pilots are paid a guarantee regardless, so the money is similar. The life is not. This is why pilots talk about seniority the way other people talk about salary. It is the actual currency of the profession. There is a cost to the top of this ladder that pay charts do not show. Long-haul flying means permanent circadian disruption. You cross 8 time zones, sleep 4 hours in a bunk, land at 3 in the morning body time, and repeat that for 20 years. The medical literature on long-term shift work and transmeridian flying is not reassuring, and pilots know it. Airlines mitigate with augmented crews and rest requirements that are far better than they were, but the fundamental problem does not go away. Ask a senior international captain what they would change, and a striking number say they would have stayed on domestic narrow-body flying and taken the smaller number. The wide-body captain earns $350,000 to $450,000 a year, and senior international captains on the largest aircraft exceed that. You command a twin-aisle aircraft on intercontinental routes with 300 passengers and an augmented crew. You fly fewer legs but longer ones, cross 8 time zones in a sitting, and sleep in a bunk behind the flight deck while a relief pilot flies. You make weather and fuel decisions over an ocean with the nearest alternate 3 hours away. Getting here requires being senior enough to hold the equipment, which at most majors means 15 to 20 years from date of hire. There is no test, no interview, and no selection. You bid, and if your seniority number is high enough, you get it. The thing nobody tells you is that many pilots senior enough to hold a wide-body captain's seat decline it. Narrow-body domestic flying pays less, but keeps you home most nights. And by the time you are senior enough to choose, that often matters more than the money. There is one more number worth knowing before the exit. Airline pilots face mandatory retirement at 65, and unlike controllers, there is no full federal pension waiting. What there is instead is a retirement account the airline contributes to heavily, often 16% of earnings, and a captain earning $400,000 for the last 15 years accumulates a very large balance. The pilots who struggle at 65 are the ones who reach the left seat late and had only 8 or 9 high-earning years. This is the quiet argument for taking the seniority hit early rather than late. A pilot who moves to a major at 32 has 33 years on that list. One who moves at 42 has 23, and the difference compounds in a way that is almost impossible to make up. There is a path outside this ladder that skips the seniority problem entirely. Corporate and fractional pilots flying business jets earn $140,000 to $300,000, and the top end at private flight departments approaches airline captain money without the 20-year wait. The trade is stability. There is no union contract, no protected schedule, and no seniority list to shield you, so a single owner changing plans can end the job. Cargo is the other branch, and freight captains at major cargo carriers earn comparably to passenger wide-body captains while flying almost entirely at night. One last thing that decides more careers than skill does. There is a phenomenon in this industry called the hiring wave, and it is driven by mandatory retirement at 65. Airlines hired in large numbers at specific points in history, and those cohorts retire in equally large numbers roughly 40 years later. When a wave hits, upgrades accelerate, regionals lose staff, and a pilot with modest hours moves up faster than anyone expected. When the wave passes, the same ladder stalls for years. 2 pilots born 5 years apart, with identical training and identical ability, can reach a wide-body seat 8 years apart because of when they happen to be hired. Nobody controls this. Understanding that it exists is the difference between reading a stall as a personal failure and reading it as arithmetic. Student pilot, -100,000. Flight instructor, 62,000. Regional first officer, 110,000. Regional captain, 170,000. Major first officer, 260,000. Wide-body captain, 450,000. Roughly 80% of people who start flight training never finish it. Of those who do, the ones who reach the top seat did it by staying at one airline for 15 to 20 years and never restarting the list. The latter rewards patience far more than it rewards talent. Next, every level of an elevator mechanic.